My roommate has been catfishing her online boyfriend using my photos for 3 years, but the twist that nobody saw coming? It started junior year when I got stuck with Cassie as a roommate after my original roommate transferred schools mid-semester. The housing office paired us together because we were both psychology majors, but that's where our similarities ended. She was one of those girls who lived in oversized hoodies, hadn't discovered the magic of mascara, and seemed genuinely confused by social interactions that came naturally to most people. While I was out at fraternity parties and student government meetings, Cassie would be hunched over her elaborate gaming setup, 3 monitors, LED lights, the works, talking to someone named Dylan through her expensive headset. She'd be giggling like a teenager with her first crush, her whole face transforming when she smiled. "He's incredible," she'd gush whenever I asked about her mysterious online boyfriend. We stay up until 4 a.m. just talking about everything. Philosophy, books, stupid internet memes, our deepest fears. He actually listens to me, you know? Like, really listens. Most people just nod along when I talk about quantum physics or fantasy novels, but Dylan asks follow-up questions. I felt genuinely happy for her. Cassie deserves someone who appreciated her brilliant mind and weird sense of humor. She'd confided in me about her rough childhood, parents who called her hobbies antisocial wastes of time, and shipped her off to an all-girls boarding school in Connecticut where she never fit in. Her mother had actually thrown away her entire gaming collection when she was 16, claiming it was rotting her brain and making her antisocial. "Dylan understands me," she'd say with this dreamy expression. "He doesn't think I'm weird for knowing every character in Lord of the Rings, or for staying up all night reading about theoretical physics. He thinks it's fascinating." For months, I'd hear her laughing through our thin walls at 2 a.m., these genuine belly laughs that I rarely heard from her during the day. I'd see her face absolutely light up whenever her phone buzzed with messages from him. She'd float around our dorm room with this dreamy expression, humming under her breath while doing calculus homework or reorganizing her book collection. She started taking better care of herself too, showering more regularly, buying clothes that actually fit instead of swimming in fabric, even experimenting with makeup tutorials on YouTube. I assumed it was because having someone who cared about her was boosting her confidence. "He wants to video chat," she mentioned one evening while we were both studying, "but I keep making excuses. I'm not ready yet." "You've been talking for over 2 years, I pointed out. "Don't you think it's time?" She got this panicked look in her eyes. I need everything to be perfect first. You know how I am about timing." I figured she was just nervous about taking their relationship to the next level. Cassie had never had a boyfriend before Dylan, never even been kissed. The idea of showing her face to someone she'd fallen in love with was probably terrifying. Then one night in October, I came back early from a disastrous Tinder date and caught her red-handed. She was hunched over her laptop with Photoshop open, carefully editing one of my Instagram photos from homecoming weekend. Not just cropping it, actually adjusting the lighting, softening my features, changing the background from the campus quad to some generic park setting. She had an entire folder labeled "For Dylan," filled with dozens of my photos, all meticulously altered and organized by date. "What the hell are you doing with my pictures?" I asked, my stomach dropping to my toes. She spun around so fast she knocked over her coffee mug, sending hot liquid cascading across her keyboard. Her face went ghost white, then bright red, then white again. "I can explain," she stammered, frantically trying to close the laptop while coffee dripped onto the floor. I pushed past her and stared at the screen. There was my face, but somehow different. Softer, more ethereal, like she'd taken my ordinary features and transformed them into something almost angelic. "Explain what exactly?" I demanded. "Why do you have dozens of my photos edited like this?" The explanation came out in a rushed, tearful confession that shattered my understanding of everything. For 3 years, 3 entire years, she'd been using my photos to catfish Dylan. Every selfie I posted, every group shot from parties, every casual snapshot from family dinners or study sessions. She'd been stealing my entire visual identity and feeding it to him piece by piece, carefully crafting a fake life using my real one as source material. "He thinks I'm you," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I never planned this. It started with just one photo because I was too scared to send a real one of myself. But then he fell in love with your face and I couldn't take it back." My hands were shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You've been pretending to be me for 3 years?" "Not pretending to be you," she said desperately. "Using your appearance, but everything else was real. My personality, my thoughts, my feelings, that was all me. I just borrowed your face." The distinction felt meaningless to me in that moment. "Borrowed my face? Cassie, this is identity theft." "Please don't make me tell him," she begged, grabbing my arm with both hands. "You don't understand. He's told his entire family about me. His mom sends Christmas cards addressed to me. His little sister follows your Instagram account thinking it's mine. She comments on your photos saying things like, 'My brother's girlfriend is so pretty,' and I die a little inside every time." The weight of her deception was staggering. An entire family had been unknowingly drawn into her web of lies. I thought about all those comments from random accounts that I'd assumed were just spam or bots. "How deep does this go?" I asked, sinking onto my bed. "What else have you told him about my life?" The full scope of her deception unfolded like a nightmare. She'd told Dylan my childhood stories as if they were her own. My family vacation to Yellowstone when I was 12 had become her favorite childhood memory. My grandmother's secret recipe for chocolate chip cookies was now her specialty dish. Even my scar from falling off my bike at age 7, she'd claimed it as her own, complete with a fabricated story about how she got it. "I know it sounds terrible," she said, wrapping her arms around herself, "but I shared pieces of you because I didn't think my own life was interesting enough. My childhood was just boarding school, and parents who barely acknowledged my existence. You had all these wonderful memories and experiences, and Dylan loved hearing about them. Those aren't your memories to share," I exploded. "You stole my entire life story." I didn't steal it, she protested weakly. I just expanded on it. And everything else was real. My feelings for him, our conversations about books and philosophy, the way we connect intellectually, that wasn't fake. I was pacing now, my mind racing through 3 years of interactions with her. All those times she'd asked to borrow my phone to check something real quick. All those occasions when she'd complimented my outfits and insisted on taking photos of me from multiple angles. All the seemingly innocent questions about my hometown, my family traditions, my childhood pets. You've been studying me, I realized with growing horror, like a research project. It wasn't like that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. What happens when he wants to meet your family? When he wants to visit your hometown? When he references a memory you stole from me and I'm standing right there? She was crying harder now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. I know it's complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. Cassie, this is insane. You can't maintain this lie forever. But then she dropped the bombshell that changed everything. He's coming here next week, she whispered. So quietly, I almost didn't hear her. My blood turned to ice. What? He texted me this morning while you were in class. He bought surprise plane tickets to finally meet me in person. He's been saving up for months, working double shifts at his job in Seattle. I felt like the room was spinning. Please tell me you're joking. He's already booked his hotel room downtown, the Marriott by the river. We're supposed to meet at the campus coffee shop Friday at 3 p.m. She showed me her phone, and there it was. A long, excited message from Dylan about how he couldn't wait any longer to hold her in his arms. Oh my God, I breathed. Oh my God, Cassie, what have you done? I've been having panic attacks all week, she admitted. I can't sleep, I can't eat. Every time I think about Friday, I feel like I'm going to throw up. You have to cancel, I said firmly, right now. Tell him there's a family emergency or something. This cannot happen. I tried, she wailed. I spent 2 hours typing different excuses, but I couldn't send any of them. He's so excited, and he's already taken time off work and bought non-refundable tickets. Plus, his best friend is driving him to the airport. Everyone in his life knows about this trip. I sank back onto my bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the disaster we were facing. What did you think was going to happen? That you'd wear a disguise? Get plastic surgery? I thought maybe I could just not show up, she said in a small voice. Let him think I got cold feet or something, then gradually fade out of his life. After 3 years, you think ghosting him is a solution? I don't know, she screamed, startling both of us. Cassie never raised her voice. I don't know what to do. I never meant for it to get this far, but every day that passed made it harder to tell the truth. How do you explain to someone that you've been lying about your appearance for 3 years? I stared at her, really stared, trying to understand how we'd gotten to this point. Cassie wasn't a bad person. She was just desperately insecure and terrified of rejection. But the web of lies she'd woven was so complex and far-reaching that I couldn't see any way out that wouldn't destroy multiple lives. There's something else, she said quietly. Something worse. My heart sank. What? He's been talking about proposing. He asked his mom for his grandmother's ring last month. I felt like I was going to be sick. Are you serious? He's been dropping hints for weeks about our future together. Moving to the same city after graduation, meeting each other's families, maybe getting a dog. She was sobbing again. He's planning his entire life around someone who doesn't exist. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation crushing down on both of us. Finally, I spoke. You have to tell him the truth. I can't, she whispered. You don't understand what this will do to him. He's told me things he's never told anyone else. About his depression in high school, his anxiety about the future, how talking to me is the highlight of his day. If he finds out it was all based on a lie, then you should have thought about that 3 years ago. I said harshly. This isn't just about you anymore, Cassie. There's a real person on the other end of this. Someone who deserves better than to be manipulated and deceived. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know I'm a horrible person. I know I've ruined everything. But I don't know how to fix it without destroying him. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who was genuinely tormented by what she'd done. Her face was blotchy from crying, her hands were shaking, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I'll help you, I heard myself say. She looked up at me with surprise and desperate hope. You will? Not to continue the lie, I clarified quickly. To tell him the truth, but we're doing it right and we're doing it in person. He deserves that much. Relief flooded her features. Thank you. I don't deserve your help after what I did, but thank you. We spent the next 3 days planning how to handle this situation. I insisted that we meet Dylan together, not so I could pretend to be her, but so I could provide moral support and witness the conversation. I also made her write down everything she'd lied about so we could present him with the complete truth. The list was extensive and heartbreaking. She'd borrowed not just my appearance, but pieces of my personality, my history, even my family's traditions. She'd told him about my dog Buster, who died when I was 14, as if he'd been her beloved pet. She described my mother's famous lasagna recipe and my father's terrible dad jokes as if they were her own family experiences. I wanted to give him the kind of childhood I never had, she explained as we went through the list. Your family sounds so warm and loving. Mine was all boarding schools and nannies and parents who were too busy with work to pay attention to me. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it didn't excuse what she'd done. So you stole mine instead of working through your own issues. I know it was wrong, she said quietly. I've known it was wrong every single day for 3 years, but I was in too deep to stop. Friday morning arrived with the sense of inevitable doom. Cassie had barely eaten anything in 2 days and looked like she was about to collapse from anxiety. I wasn't feeling much better. My stomach was in knots thinking about how this conversation would go. We arrived at the campus coffee shop 30 minutes early and claimed a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Cassie's hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold her coffee cup. What if he calls the police? She asked for the 20th time. What if he thinks I'm a stalker or a predator? Then we'll deal with that if it happens, I said, though the same thought had occurred to me. But he's not going to call the police. He's going to be hurt and confused and probably angry, but he's not going to have you arrested. How can you be so sure? Because he's been talking to the real you for 3 years, I pointed out. Your personality, your humor, your intelligence, that was all genuine. He fell in love with who you are as a person, not just what you look like. At 2:45 p.m., a tall guy with dark hair and kind eyes walked through the door. He was more attractive than I'd expected. Definitely not the stereotypical basement-dwelling gamer I'd pictured. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, and carried himself with quiet confidence. He looked around the coffee shop with nervous excitement, clearly searching for someone. Is that him? I whispered. Cassie looked up and immediately ducked her head back down. Oh God, yes, that's Dylan. He ordered a large coffee and a blueberry muffin, then found a table near the window where he could watch the door. He kept checking his phone and glancing around the room with anticipation. The hopeful expression on his face was heartbreaking. He genuinely believed he was about to meet the love of his life. I can't do this, Cassie whispered, starting to stand up. I need to leave, right now. I grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. You're not running away, not after 3 years. He deserves an explanation. But look how happy he is, she said, her voice breaking. I'm about to destroy that. You destroyed it 3 years ago, I said firmly. Now you're going to give him the chance to decide what comes next. At exactly 3:00 p.m., I made Cassie call his number. We watched from across the room as Dylan's face lit up when his phone rang. Hey, beautiful, he answered, his voice carrying across the quiet coffee shop. I'm here a little early because I just couldn't wait any longer to see you. Are you close? Cassie's face crumpled at the warmth in his voice. Dylan, I'm here too, but I need to tell you something really important before we meet face to face. His expression shifted to concern. Okay, you sound upset. What's wrong? I need to be completely honest with you about something, she said, her voice shaking. And I need you to promise you'll hear me out before you react. You're starting to scare me a little, he said with a nervous laugh. But okay, I promise. I watched as she took a deep breath and steeled herself for what was coming next. The photos I've been sending you for the past 3 years aren't of me, she blurted out. They're of my roommate. You fell in love with her face, not mine. The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan's expression went through several phases. Confusion, disbelief, hurt, and then something that looked almost like understanding. What do you mean exactly? He asked quietly. I mean I've been catfishing you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I used my roommate's photos because I was too scared to send real ones of myself. I thought you wouldn't like me if you knew what I actually looked like. Dylan was quiet for a long moment, processing what she'd told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was remarkably calm. Cassie, I need to tell you something too. Both Cassie and I froze. This was not the reaction we'd expected. I know, he said simply. My head snapped up. Cassie nearly dropped her phone. What? She whispered. I've known for about 6 months, Dylan continued, his voice gentle but serious. I hired a private investigator because I was planning to propose. I wanted to surprise you by flying out there, but I needed to verify some details first. Your real address, your full name, that kind of thing. Cassie stared at him across the coffee shop, her mouth hanging open in shock. You knew? The investigator found your real social media accounts pretty quickly, he explained. Your actual photos, your real name, information about your family and background. I saw what you really looked like. Then why are you here? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dylan's expression softened, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine tenderness in his eyes. Because I didn't fall in love with your photos, Cassie. I fell in love with your mind, your sense of humor, the way you explain complicated scientific concepts like you're telling bedtime stories, how you stay up until 3 a.m. talking me through panic attacks, the way you remember every tiny detail about my life, and ask follow-up questions about things I mentioned weeks ago. Cassie was crying openly now, but they were different tears than before. But I lied to you for 3 years, she sobbed. I stole someone else's identity. I made you fall in love with a fake person. You didn't make me fall in love with a fake person, Dylan said firmly. You made me fall in love with the real you. Your thoughts, your dreams, your fears, your terrible taste in horror movies. Everything that matters was authentic. You just wore someone else's face while you did it? I felt my own eyes welling up. This was definitely not how I'd expected this conversation to go. I don't understand, Cassie said into the phone. If you knew I was lying about my appearance, why didn't you confront me about it? Because I was scared too, Dylan admitted. I was afraid that if I called you out on the deception, you'd panic and disappear from my life completely. I figured when you were ready to trust me with the truth, you would. I just didn't expect it to take this long. But aren't you angry? She asked. Don't you feel betrayed? Honestly? I was hurt when I first found out, he said. It stung to realize you didn't trust me enough to be honest about something so basic. But then I thought about why you might have done it, and I understood. Dylan stood up from his table and started walking toward us, still talking on the phone. You've told me about your childhood, remember? The boarding school where you never fit in, the parents who made you feel like your interests were worthless, the kids who bullied you for being different. Of course you were afraid to show your real face to someone you cared about. You'd been taught your whole life that you weren't good enough as you were. He stopped in front of our table, looking directly at Cassie with an expression of pure love and acceptance. Hi, he said simply, ending the phone call. You're even more beautiful than your real photos showed. Cassie burst into tears. But this time, they were tears of relief and overwhelming emotion. Dylan sat down next to her without hesitation and pulled her into a gentle hug. I'm so sorry, she whispered against his shoulder. I'm so sorry for lying to you. I know you are, he said, stroking her hair. And I forgave you months ago. I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself. I sat there watching this reunion, feeling like an intruder in an incredibly intimate moment. After a few minutes, Dylan looked over at me with a warm smile. You must be the famous roommate, he said. Thank you for letting Cassie borrow your face for 3 years. Though I have to say, she's much more beautiful in person. Cassie laughed through her tears. You're just saying that because you feel sorry for me. I'm really not, Dylan said seriously, taking her hands in his. You want to know something? The investigator showed me dozens of your real photos from social media. I spent hours looking at them, and all I could think was how much more alive and vibrant you looked compared to the edited versions you'd been sending me. He turned to me with an apologetic expression. No offense intended. You're beautiful too. But there's something special about Cassie that can't be captured in a photograph. None taken, I said, still somewhat stunned by how this was all playing out. I'm just glad this is working out better than we expected. Were you expecting me to storm out? Dylan asked with curiosity. Honestly? Yes, I admitted. I thought you'd be furious about being deceived for so long. Dylan considered this for a moment. I probably would have been if I discovered it differently. But having time to process it and understand the reasons behind it made all the difference. Plus, I could see how tormented Cassie was about the whole thing just from our conversations. She's been dropping hints for months about feeling like she didn't deserve happiness. The three of us sat in that coffee shop for the next 4 hours talking through everything. Dylan and Cassie addressed the lies one by one. Every borrowed memory, every stolen detail from my life. It was painful but necessary, like cleaning out an infected wound. I need you to know that everything else was real, Cassie kept emphasizing. My feelings for you, our conversations, the connection we have, none of that was fake. I know, Dylan assured her. That's why I'm still here. As the afternoon wore on, I watched their dynamic carefully. Despite the circumstances, they interacted like they'd been best friends for years, which, in a way, they had been. There was an ease between them that you don't often see in couples who are just meeting for the first time. They shared inside jokes, finished each other's sentences, and had the kind of comfortable physical affection that usually takes months to develop. Can I ask you something? Dylan said to me as the sun was setting outside. When did you find out about all this? 3 days ago, I replied. I walked in on her editing my photos and had a complete meltdown. What made you decide to help her instead of turning her into campus security or something? I thought about it for a moment. I guess I realized that she wasn't trying to hurt anyone maliciously. She was just terrified of being rejected for who she really was. And honestly, seeing how much this whole thing was eating her alive, it was clear she was punishing herself more than I ever could. Dylan nodded thoughtfully. She's lucky to have a friend like you. I'm the lucky one, Cassie interjected, squeezing my hand. I don't deserve her forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it every day. As evening approached, Dylan suggested we grab dinner at a nearby restaurant. I made reservations for 2, he said with a grin, but I'm sure they can squeeze in one more chair. Over pasta and wine, Dylan told us about his life in Seattle. He worked as a software developer for a gaming company, which explained how he and Cassie had initially connected. His parents were divorced but friendly. He had 2 younger siblings, and he'd been saving money for over a year to make this trip happen. I was terrified, he admitted. Not just about meeting Cassie, but about the possibility that we might not have the same chemistry in person that we had online. Long-distance relationships are hard enough without adding the uncertainty of whether you'll actually click face-to-face. And now? Cassie asked nervously. Dylan reached across the table and took her hand. Now I'm wondering why I waited so long to make this happen. The transformation in Cassie was remarkable. Over the course of just a few hours, she'd gone from terrified and guilt-ridden to genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen before. She was more animated, more confident, more herself than she'd been in the entire time I'd known her. There's something I need to ask, Dylan said as we were finishing dessert. What happens now? I mean, I fly back to Seattle tomorrow, and you're here finishing school. I've been thinking about that, Cassie said. I know this is crazy, but what if I transferred? There are good psychology programs in Washington, and I could finish my degree there. You'd do that? Dylan asked, his eyes lighting up. I'd do anything to make this work, she said. If you'll have me, knowing everything you know now. Dylan's answer was to kiss her right there in the middle of the restaurant, earning applause from nearby tables who had been eavesdropping on their conversation. The next morning, I drove them to the airport together. Dylan's flight wasn't until evening, but they wanted to spend every possible moment together before he left. Watching them say goodbye was both heartbreaking and beautiful. You could see how much they meant to each other, but also how difficult the separation was going to be. I'll start looking into transfer applications as soon as I get back, Cassie promised. And we'll video chat every single day so you can see my actual face. I can't wait, Dylan said, kissing her forehead. Though I have to warn you, I'm not nearly as photogenic as your roommate's Instagram makes me look. 6 months later, Cassie did transfer to the University of Washington. I helped her pack up our dorm room, feeling genuinely happy for her, but also sad to lose such an interesting roommate. She'd grown so much over those months, gaining confidence, making other friends, even joining a campus club for female gamers. I can't thank you enough, she said as we loaded the last of her boxes into the moving truck. You could have reported me, gotten me expelled, ruined my life. Instead, you helped me find it. You would have done the same for me, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. She moved in with Dylan that fall, and by all accounts, they were blissfully happy. She sent me regular updates, photos of their apartment, stories about meeting his family, updates on her progress in her new psychology program. The most surprising development came a year later when she called me with unexpected news. Dylan proposed, she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. With his grandmother's ring, just like he'd planned. Congratulations, I said, genuinely thrilled for her. When's the wedding? Next spring. And I have a huge favor to ask. Would you be my maid of honor? I was touched and surprised. Are you sure, given everything that happened? Especially because of everything that happened, she said firmly. You're the reason I have this life, this happiness. You're the reason Dylan and I found each other, the real versions of ourselves. The wedding was beautiful, a small ceremony in Dylan's hometown with both families present. Cassie looked radiant in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or photography tricks. She was genuinely, authentically happy. During her vows, she said something that made everyone cry. "You fell in love with who I really was, even when I was too scared to believe in that person myself." Dylan's response was equally moving. "I didn't fall in love with your face. I fell in love with your heart, your mind, your soul. Everything else was just packaging." At the reception, Dylan's best man told a story about how Dylan had been obsessed with this girl he'd never met for years, working extra shifts to save money for plane tickets and talking about her constantly. "We all thought he was crazy," the best man admitted with a laugh. "But seeing them together now, I get it. Some connections transcend physical appearance." As I watched them dance to their first song as husband and wife, I reflected on everything that had led to this moment. Cassie's deception had been wrong. There was no denying that. But it had also led to something beautiful and genuine. The experience taught me something profound about identity and authenticity. We live in a world where appearance seems to matter more than substance, where people swipe left or right based on a single photo. Cassie's story was a reminder that real love, the kind that lasts, is about so much more than what someone looks like. 2 years later, they moved back to our college town when Dylan got a job with a local tech startup. We became close friends again, getting together regularly for game nights and dinner parties. Cassie had grown into someone I barely recognized from our college days. Confident, outgoing, genuinely comfortable in her own skin. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked her one evening as we were cleaning up after hosting a dinner party. "The way everything happened?" She considered the question seriously. "I regret the lying," she said finally. "I regret putting you in that position and deceiving Dylan for so long, but I don't regret the outcome. If I hadn't been too scared to show him my real face, we might never have developed the kind of deep connection we had. The deception was wrong, but it gave us time to fall in love with each other's minds first. And that made all the difference?" "It made all the difference," she confirmed. "When he finally saw me, really saw me, he already knew who I was inside. The exterior was just details." Their story became something of a legend in our friend group. People would bring up the catfish couple as an example of true love conquering all obstacles. But I knew the real truth was more complex than that. It wasn't just about love conquering obstacles. It was about finding someone who valued the right thing. Dylan could have been angry about the deception. He could have felt betrayed or manipulated. Instead, he chose to see past the lie to the person underneath. And Cassie had learned to value herself the way Dylan valued her. She'd spent her whole life believing she wasn't good enough as she was. But retry Jay continue at it, and Cassie had learned to value herself the way Dylan valued her. She'd spent her whole life believing she wasn't good enough as she was. But Dylan's acceptance had shown her that her worth wasn't tied to her appearance or her family's expectations. It came from her intelligence, her kindness, her unique way of seeing the world. 3 years after the wedding, they had their first child, a daughter they named Hope. Cassie called me from the hospital, exhausted but elated. "She's perfect," she whispered into the phone. "And you know what? She looks exactly like me. Not the edited, filtered version of me that I used to send Dylan. The real me. That's beautiful," I said, wiping away tears I hadn't expected. "I want her to grow up knowing she's enough exactly as she is," Cassie continued. "I never want her to feel like she needs to hide behind someone else's face to be loved." When I visited them in the hospital the next day, I was struck by how natural Dylan looked holding his daughter. He kept staring at her with this expression of pure wonder, like he couldn't believe something so perfect had come from his love with Cassie. "She has your eyes," I told Cassie as I held little Hope. "And Dylan's stubborn chin," she laughed. "Poor kid doesn't stand a chance." Dylan overheard and grinned. "Hey, this stubborn chin helped me wait 3 years for your mom to trust me with the truth. Hope's going to need that kind of persistence in life." As Hope grew, she became a perfect blend of both parents. Dylan's quiet determination and Cassie's brilliant curiosity about the world. She was walking by 10 months, reading by age 3, and asking complex questions about everything from quantum physics to why people sometimes lie to each other. "Mommy," she asked one day when she was 4, "why do people sometimes pretend to be someone else?" Cassie and Dylan exchanged a look across the dinner table. They'd agreed to be honest with Hope about their story when she was old enough to understand it, but they hadn't expected the question quite so early. "Sometimes people are scared," Cassie said carefully, "that if they show who they really are, people won't like them. But that's silly," Hope said matter-of-factly. "If someone doesn't like the real you, then they're not your real friend." Out of the mouths of babes. Dylan reached over and squeezed Cassie's hand. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart," he said. "It took Mommy and Daddy a while to learn that lesson, but you're much smarter than we were." The years passed quickly after that. Dylan's tech startup was acquired by a major company, giving them financial security they'd never expected. Cassie finished her master's degree in child psychology and opened a practice specializing in adolescents with social anxiety, a field she was uniquely qualified to understand. "I want to help kids who feel like I did," she explained when she was deciding on her specialization. "Kids who think they're not good enough as they are, who might be tempted to create false identities to feel accepted." Her practice thrived. Parents drove from hours away to bring their teenagers to see Dr. Cassie, as her young patients called her. She had a way of connecting with kids who felt invisible or misunderstood, probably because she'd been one of them. I often wondered what would have happened if things had gone differently that day in the coffee shop. What if Dylan had reacted with anger instead of understanding? What if he'd never hired that private investigator and had discovered the truth in a more devastating way? But every time I saw them together, watching Dylan cheer at Hope's school plays, seeing Cassie laugh at his terrible dad jokes, witnessing the way they still held hands after a decade of marriage, I realized that their love story couldn't have unfolded any other way. The deception had been wrong, but it had also been necessary. Not because Cassie needed to trick Dylan into loving her, but because she needed time to believe she was worthy of love. The 3 years of online relationship had given her a safe space to be herself intellectually and emotionally, while she worked up the courage to be vulnerable physically. And Dylan's decision to investigate rather than confront had shown a level of emotional maturity that probably saved their relationship. He'd understood instinctively that directly challenging her about the photos would have caused her to run, so he'd chosen patience instead. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they threw a party at their house, the same house where Dylan had first said, "I love you," in person, where they'd brought Hope home from the hospital, where they'd built a life together that was more beautiful than any filtered photograph. During the toasts, Dylan's best man, the same one who'd called him crazy for being obsessed with a girl he'd never met, stood up with a glass of champagne. 10 years ago, I thought Dylan had lost his mind, he said to laughter from the assembled guests. He was planning to fly across the country to meet someone he'd never seen in person, based on what I assumed was just good texting chemistry. He paused, looking at Cassie with genuine affection. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was especially wrong about what makes a relationship last. I thought it was all about physical attraction and compatibility, but watching Dylan and Cassie over the years has taught me that the strongest foundation for love is actually seeing and accepting who someone really is. Not just their appearance, but their heart, their mind, their soul. The crowd raised their glasses, and I found myself getting emotional again. Even after all these years, their story still moved me. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, Cassie found me on the back porch where I was getting some air. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, sitting down beside me on the porch swing Dylan had built the previous summer. I was just thinking about that day in the coffee shop, I admitted, how terrified we both were about how Dylan would react. "The best day of my life," she said without hesitation, even though I was sure it was going to be the worst. "Really? Not your wedding day? Or when Hope was born?" Cassie smiled. "Those were incredible days, but they happened because of that day in the coffee shop. That was the day I stopped hiding and started living." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Hope play in the backyard with some of the other kids who'd attended the party. She was 8 now, confident and outgoing in a way that reminded me of myself at that age, but with Cassie's genuine curiosity and Dylan's steady kindness. "She's going to be something special," I said. "She already is," Cassie replied. "And the best part is that she knows it. She's never going to doubt her worth the way I did." "You've built something beautiful here," I told her, gesturing toward the house where Dylan was cleaning up with help from several friends. "Not just the marriage, but the whole life, the practice, the community, the way you've turned your experience into something that helps other people." "I had help," she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. "I had a roommate who could have destroyed me but chose to save me instead." "You saved yourself," I corrected. "I just provided moral support." "You provided everything," she said seriously. "Hope, faith, the courage to be honest. I would never have had the strength to tell Dylan the truth without you there." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I helped with the final cleanup. Dylan was loading the dishwasher while Cassie got Hope ready for bed, and I was struck by how normal and domestic their life had become. If you didn't know their history, you'd never guess that their relationship had started with such dramatic deception. "Thank you," Dylan said as I was getting ready to leave, "for everything you did 10 years ago, and for being such a constant presence in our lives since then. Thank you for proving that good guys really do exist," I replied. "Your reaction that day restored my faith in humanity a little bit." He laughed. "I'm not sure I deserve that much credit. I just knew that Cassie was worth fighting for, even if she didn't believe it herself yet." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed since those early days of rooming with Cassie. I'd graduated, started my own career in marketing, had a few serious relationships that didn't work out, and eventually found my own version of happiness. But I'd never forgotten the lesson I learned from watching Cassie and Dylan's story unfold. That real love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone whose imperfections complement your own. It's about choosing to see past surface-level deceptions to the truth underneath. The twist that nobody saw coming wasn't just that Dylan already knew about the catfishing. It was that the deception itself had created the conditions for a love deeper and more authentic than either of them had thought possible. Sometimes the most broken beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Sometimes the biggest lies reveal the most important truths. And sometimes, the person hiding behind someone else's face is exactly who you were meant to find all along. Cassie never did become the Supreme Court justice that her stepmother had envisioned, or the perfect society wife her parents had wanted. Instead, she became something better, herself, fully and completely, loved and accepted exactly as she was. And in a world full of filters and facades, that was the most radical transformation of all.